This is the video for the worksheets for Chapter 18. Chapter 18 is from 1848 to 1854. It kind of deals with California and the discovery of gold. Compromise of 1850 is a big part of this chapter, and the issue of popular sovereignty becomes important. All images and videos within this video presentation are in the public domain. If you download this worksheet, most of the images are links to the source from which they were taken from. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give me an email or a call. Thank you. This is Chapter 18. So as we start Chapter 18, I want to kind of focus on this idea, popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty, number 3 here, this idea of popular sovereignty. And this becomes an important theme for the next several chapters leading up to the Civil War, leading to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, so on and so forth. So if you look here, this paragraph is on page 378. It's the answer to questions 3 and 4. Lewis Cass himself had not been silent. His views on the extension of slavery were well known because he was the reputed father of popular sovereignty. So this popular sovereignty, this doctrine that stated that people of a territory under the general principles of the Constitution should themselves determine the status of slavery. So the people of a future state should vote on whether or not that future state should have the status of slavery. So popular sovereignty had a persuasive appeal. The public liked it because it, according with the democratic tradition of self-determination, the politicians liked it because it seemed a comfortable compromise between the abolitionists' bid for a ban on slavery in the territories and Southern demands for Congress' protection of slavery in the territories. So just the answers to questions 3 and 4 are in this paragraph on page 378. So hopefully you get a good grasp of popular sovereignty as you read through this first part of the chapter. So as we continue with this chapter, the reason why the future of these territories is being discussed is because of the discovery of gold in California. And so it says, but the discovery, and then it continues on this map here. The discovery of gold in 1848 changed everything. So think of the San Francisco 49ers, the football team. The 49ers are named after the rush of population to California in 1849 because gold was discovered in 1848. It took a while for people to pack up and decide to move to California, but gold was actually discovered in 1848. Because of this gold, California and the population gain, California is going to become, or have the population to become a state. So with California having enough population to become a state, the issue is California going to become a slave state or a free state? And so California, potentially the golden straw that would break the back of the Union, and the issue that if California, if they can't come up with a compromise of California admittance, then it could quickly lead to civil war. Because remember, the balance in the Senate, in the United States Senate, is key. You must have the same, in order to preserve peace, the thought was you need to maintain the same number of slave states as free states. Now eventually this compromise is the Compromise of 1850. So the concessions for the North are listed on page 384. So California eventually does come in. California comes in as a free state then this disputed territory, New Mexico, is to be surrendered, and there's going to be no more slavery in the District of Columbia. So, well, it's no more slave trade, that is key. No more slave trade, but it's kind of crazy to think that we still had slavery in our nation's capital, just no more slave trade. So that's what the North conceded, or the concessions, that's what the South conceded to the North. Now as we get to the next page, we'll talk about what the South, concessions the South gave. So as we look at, again, further with the Compromise of 1850, these are the concessions of the South, concessions to the South. So the remainder of the Mexican secession were to be formed into territories of New Mexico and Utah. There is no restriction, however, on slavery, but in New Mexico and Utah, the people of those territories would have the choice, the popular sovereignty to choose. So there's a chance that slavery would expand into New Mexico and Utah. Texas, a southern state, receives $10 million, and the fugitive slave law is actually enforced more stringently. In other words, if you do as a slave escape to the North, you can still be captured and returned. And so this put an emphasis on slaves. If they were going to escape, they needed to go all the way to Canada. So let's take a look at this map. So if you have, prior to this Compromise of 1850, you have this line here, and it's the Compromise of 1820. Compromise of 1820 and the Missouri Compromise of 3630. So according to the Missouri Compromise, all states north of 36, all future states north of 3630 were going to be free states. All states south of 3630 would be slave states, but that did not include then this new territory purchased from Mexico as a result of the Mexican War. So now these future states would not fall under 1820. The Compromise of 1850 allowed these two states to have these two future states to have popular sovereignty. However, California will be admitted as a free state, and then to compromise that, make sure that the Senate has equal representation, we're going to look at splitting up one of these northeastern states and allowing, well, no, cancel that. That's a mistake on my part. The compromise allows California to come in as a free state. It allows for these potential states to come in as slave states. But you can see California coming in as a free state is going to tip the balance in the United States Senate in the favor of free states. So let's look at number 15 now. The alarming phrase that could have cost Seward the presidency. So Seward is interested in running for president. Seward is a leading abolitionist, and Seward, he argues that slavery must apply with a higher law than the Constitution. In other words, he's talking and calling upon God's moral law, and this was extremely radical talk by an abolitionist, and the South did not take kindly to that kind of language. So that's kind of the answer to number 15. And then we'll look at number 21 here. So the Compromise of 1850, how did it help the Union win the Civil War? And you'll find the answers to that question on page 387. 387, the last full paragraph, or the last full paragraph in the section before it says defeat and doom for the Whigs. The last sentence is there, but it mentions in the textbook that delay immensely added to the moral strength of the North. So the Compromise of 1850 delayed the Civil War. It was a compromise, so it delayed the Civil War. And so it gave this decade, because the Civil War eventually starts in 1860, but this decade gave the North time to accumulate, and then it continues here, to accumulate the material and the moral strength that provided the margin of victory. Thus, the Compromise, from one point of view, won the Civil War. This extra 10 years to delay the Civil War, this extra 10 years gave the North time to gain population, gain wealth, gain industry, and gain a moral force that eventually was enough to help them win the Civil War. So that's the answer to number 21, and it can be found on page 387. Now we'll move to the next page of your worksheets. So I'll talk a little bit more about these themes in the PowerPoint, but just wanted to call your attention to some of these maps. The Kansas Territory, as Kansas grew in population, then the Kansas Territory had enough to become a state, but it is clearly north of the 3630 line. So according to the Compromise of 1820, Kansas should automatically become a free state, but because of the Popular Sovereignty Initiative, it was suggested that Kansas should have the opportunity to vote on whether Kansas becomes a free or a slave state. This was very controversial, and it was arranged by Stephen Douglas, this individual, Stephen Douglas, from Chicago, from Illinois. He was very interested in maneuvering a railroad plan. So this railroad plan was, according to Stephen Douglas, going to connect the northern territories and eventually California to Chicago. Now the South was very interested in a southern railroad. Now this southern railroad would draw gold wealth and other economic opportunities to the South. So a compromise was popular sovereignty. And so Stephen Douglas comes up with this idea that if the South would give up their ideas for a southern railroad route, then Stephen Douglas would help push through this idea of popular sovereignty above 3630. And that leads us then to the Lincoln-Douglas debates about popular sovereignty. Hopefully I'll be able to explain that a little bit better in the PowerPoint video. But take a look at one of the reasons that the enforcement of the fugitive slave law was so important is it led to then Harriet Tubman's underground railroads. Slaves who were escaping needed to try to get all the way to Canada, not just across the Ohio River from Kentucky to Ohio, but they had to get all the way up to Canada. So that was important as well. And we'll spend more time looking at this cartoon in the PowerPoint. But forcing slavery down the throat of a free soiler. This has to do with Kansas, bleeding Kansas, and just the way in which the vote occurred, the popular sovereignty vote, the vote in Kansas. So that concludes the video accompaniment for the worksheet questions for Chapter 18. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email or give me a call. Thank you.